Welcome, I'm Dr. Randy Bach. I'm with the Newton Taxpayer Association in Newton, Massachusetts, and our fine state is going to be having a couple elections this year, gubernatorial and U.S. Senate. And to wit, I have last round's 2024's Republican nominee for the U.S. Senate role, John Deaton, with us, and he's running again now. And I've been impressed by him, and I think you will be too. John, thank you so much for coming on our show.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be with you.
So why don't we just find out who John Deaton is? And Admiral Stockdale got raked over the coals when he was running with Ross Perot. He began the vice presidential debate.
I remember that.
Who am I and why am I here?
Yeah, who am I and why am I on this stage?
But I think it was just because they wanted to do that and
Right.
rake him over the coals. He was the older guy, whatever. But it's not; those are not bad questions. So who are you and why are you here?
They're not. Listen, it'll be very hard to find someone with my kind of unique life experience. First and foremost, I'm a father of 3 daughters. I live in Bolton, Massachusetts, but my background, I come from extreme poverty. And a lot of people talk about poverty, but I mean extreme poverty. Single mother on welfare and food stamps, a deadbeat dad who abandoned us. We were living in a place called Highland Park, Detroit, and if people look it up, they'll see it's ranked in the top 5 worst neighborhoods in America for the last 50 years. Unfortunately, I saw my mom get stabbed when I was 6, and after that, unfortunately, 3 years later, at the age of 9, a child predator began brutally raping me for a period of 2 years. My best friend died in my arms in a drive-by at 17. My first day of high school, I had a gun shoved in my mouth. And so I became a high school dropout, just like everyone else in my family. Before me, all my siblings, first cousins. And I found a tiny Catholic high school in the suburbs of Detroit. And a principal, it shows you what one person's kindness can change the trajectory of a person's life. He made me earn it, but he gave me a shot. He reduced the tuition in half. Told me I had to play 2 sports, maintain at 3.5, and at age 14, I began working 18-hour days, going to school. I paid my way through high school, then college, and I made it here to Massachusetts, to New England School of Law. Lived in Roxbury my first year, East Boston my second, Malden my third. Realized I am the embodiment of the American dream and everything that's possible in a great country. And if you give an opportunity, you're willing to work hard. Joined the Marine Corps, 7 years of active duty in the Marine Corps. Got injured, not in combat, but in training. Got medically retired, and for the last 25 years, I've been a mesothelioma and lung cancer attorney for people who are exposed to asbestos. So I've been fighting insurance companies and multi-billion-dollar corporations for a few decades here in Massachusetts and New England. And a couple years ago, I was sitting on the couch in Swansea, that's where I lived at the time, saw Elizabeth Warren running and decided I felt compelled. I think the American dream is dying. I wondered if a poor kid like me back in the day, living in Brockton or Roxbury, could they do what I did in today's world? Decided to run, ran as a first-time no-name candidate and got beat pretty handily, but proved a lot of momentum, and decided I would run again against Ed Markey, and I'm looking forward to that comparison. I got about 41% the first time, and I think that I can reach 10% more and become your next U.S. Senator.
Well, we very much like that. When you're speaking, it's redolent for me of LeBron James, frankly. People probably know that he grew up hard scrapple. His mom had drug issues, and he doesn't even know his dad, even as wealthy as he is. Nobody's come out of the woodworks to announce, so there was a lot of question there. But he was taken up and sort of adopted, I guess, by ex-military and football coach. I think he might have been, in the police or whatever. But somebody who, I think he was a school teacher, but somebody who understood discipline and applying himself, and he could have chosen any number of different lives or had those lives chosen for him, and he wound up getting the regiment. And he did not serve in the military like you, but having that kind of applied expectation, such as you're talking about from
Right.
the Catholic school teacher. I think that's really crucial and important and makes a man. And you probably have those other things kind of with you and haunting you, but the fact that you were able to kind of persevere and get through that, it speaks volumes.
No, listen, I wrote a book called Food Stamp Warrior because I realized when my daughters went to college, I started waking up and quite frankly in the middle of the night, and I would be weeping, crying, and I would be thinking about whether it was the rapes or my best friend dying in my arms or my mom, and I couldn't understand why that, I had money in the bank, I was a successful lawyer, I'd broken the cycle of poverty, I'd broken the cycle of being a deadbeat dad, I was a good father, and it was that unexamined trauma, and so I wrote this book called Food Stamp Warrior, and it was great. You know, I'd never shared that I had been raped for 40 years. No one knew. No one in my family knew. It was something I kept inside, and what I learned by writing the book is we're all so much similar. You don't have to have those experiences, but we all carry sort of scars of human life and experiences, and whether it's poverty or cancer or single mom, there's lots of things that resonate with everyone. And so I think I'm one of you, and that's why I'm running. I think it's time that we elect someone that's one of us to go to the Senate.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a mischaracterization of Republicans. When I grew up, it's kind of this essence of the country club Republican, removed from reality. I don't know who made this theory, but I read this some time ago, and I have been unable to find the source. But it's called the hamburger theory of politics. And the top bun and the bottom bun these days are the Democrats. So the upper class and the lower class are Democrats, and the meat, kind of the working class and the people who are producing and so forth, and essentially, figuratively, the meat of society are Republicans these days. And Donald Trump, kind of got in 2016 based on, he's kind of like Richie, I don't even know the comic book, Richie Rich. But you grew up thinking, oh, he's rich, he's got everything's gold and whatnot. But he had a real commonality and an understanding of the working class man. I've written on narcotic addiction, and Donald Trump was able to carry Michigan and a lot of the blue-collar Midwest states, understanding that there was, a lot of unemployment and people losing focus and all that kind of stuff. And nobody's talking about it during his first administration, but it was the first time in decades that the number of opioid deaths had declined. And it was like crickets, quiet like crazy because they didn't want to give him a victory on this. But the approach was not to treat the drug problem. The approach was to get people industrious, get people back to work. And I think that's really important. So,
the Reagan Democrats in Michigan is who he carried.
That's the thing. It's like, so, George H.W. Bush, the first, kind of got pilloried for the kinder, gentler, nation and whatnot. But it is, in a sense, Republicans who are showing more care. They're not having the war on poverty and have poverty win, but they keep, their battalions out and getting funded. A lot of times, the best kind of compassion is, getting people back to work and so forth. So that's to set up this question. What do we do to kind of continue the progress we had against the drug war, for instance?
Well, the first thing is, obviously, we've done some things well, like securing the border was very important. I went to the border at Yuma Crossing in May of 2024 and learned that the fentanyl that comes in New England, 80% of it comes from the Yuma Crossing. And I learned that 12 million people had crossed in that 3.5 years of Biden's first administration. So that's important, and I think going to the source of the cartels, but also personal accountability. I mean, that's why I made a point of that high school principal. He didn't just feel sorry for me, this poor kid, right, who was a high school dropout because of violence. He said, I'm going to give you an opportunity, but you're going to earn it. And you're going to have these requirements that you meet. That's what we need to instill in people. And, my hatred of poverty is in part what drove me, to be honest with you. And I understand poverty in a way that these elected officials could never fathom to understand. Just to give an example what poverty does and why it drove me so hard, the hatred of it. My mother is my hero. Single mother on welfare, did the best she could, only had an 8th grade education. When she called me crying so much because I couldn't go to high school, she said, why are you so upset? And I said, I want to go to college. I have to graduate high school, Mom. And she said, well, just do what your brother did. Work until you're 17. I'll sign the papers and you join the military. That's our ticket out of the hood, right? And I said, Mom, I don't want to do that. And my beautiful mother put her arms around me to console me and said, son, I'm sorry, but college just isn't for people like us. And that's what poverty had done to my mother. It stripped her of that self-esteem that we were subclass citizens or humans because of being so poor, and that drove me. Because, like I said, she's my hero, and that's what poverty had done to her.
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, that's a cloud. The silver lining is, you know, you are a man.
That's right.
And one way or another, I'm not sure what the sequence was, but you know, I was in high school when the Vietnam War was on, and I got my lottery number. It was a good number, I guess, because I didn't get picked, whatnot. But you know, how would my life have been different? I don't know. You know, we had, you know, kind of. I grew up in a small rent-controlled apartment. My parents put all the money and they put us to private school. So there's something they had to do. Maybe, you know, but it was like tough circumstances and so forth. Nothing like yours. But I do think that having experienced that kind of thing, you know, gives you a hunger and gives you a sense of wanting to do well. And I think, you know, first of all, I applaud you for putting your time and effort into something that, you know, some people might think quixotic in a way, like, oh, you know, how can a Republican win in this state and so forth. So let me just put that question to you. How can a Republican win in this state?
A Republican can win in this state, and I plan on proving that a Republican can. First, Republicans have won for governor. It hasn't been at the federal level for senator or Congress in quite some time. So it shows you that there is an appetite for a certain type of Republican, I believe a common sense type Republican, no doubt, that is addressing people's problems, not ideology. But I don't have a primary opponent this time, and it's going to allow me to take the case to the 64% that are unenrolled here in Massachusetts, independents are called unenrolled in Massachusetts, and even disenfranchised Democrats who believe they've just went too far left. I know so many lifelong Democrats. You know, we call them the JFK Democrats. Personally, I believe if JFK were alive today, he would be ousted
from
the Democratic Party. He would be a Massachusetts Republican, right? And you know, and so there's a lot of people out there that I think are ready for that, and they want somebody who will address their solution. We live in a one-party state that every statewide office is a Democrat. All 9 members of the House are Democrats. Both U.S. senators Democrats, and we're number 1, unfortunately, with migration. People leaving because they can't afford it here. We are dead last in housing affordability. We are dead last in private sector job growth. Massachusetts is hurting, and I think that when they have someone who's not just running because Ed Markey's old, and he's 80, and he's been there since 1976, but I'm coming with real ideas, fresh ideas. I have an energy plan, common sense energy plan, where we put 4 nuclear SMR, small modular reactors, and we feed 40% of our power to the 2.9 million homes that need it at carbon-free emissions, 97% efficiency. I have a housing plan that's going to build houses that, you know, cuts through the red tape. I have a student loan plan that makes the colleges on the hook for the loan, so they're incentivized to help find jobs and actually teach things that lead to jobs. Just a lot of fresh ideas that are addressing our problems, and I'm looking forward to making the case to those 64% independents.
Right. So it must be a little bit of, you know, when you're running for U.S. Senate from a state, people are always like, what are you going to do for us? You know, whereas it's a federal position, and you're working on, you know, things that affect all 50 states. So, so tell us kind of the focus for Massachusetts and the focus for our country.
Well, here we have, if you look at the 2 people that are on the Democratic side, Ed Markey and Seth Moulton are in a primary. Seth Moulton came out and said the reason to vote for him over Ed Markey is he's younger and he'll fight Trump harder. Ed Markey's whole platform is how much he'll fight President Trump. It's a 6-year term. President Trump will not be the president 3 years from now. So their whole message is fighting against this one person, this one thing, and I think people are ready to fight for it. In Massachusetts, there should be one test. Is it good for Massachusetts in America, in the Senate? If it is, you support it. And if it isn't, you don't. But we know that no matter what President Trump does, if his name's associated to it, if he's the president, our current senators will say no, no matter what. I think you should always be a maybe. And you should be a maybe depending on, and it shouldn't be depending on what party the president is. show me that it's good for my state. Show me that it's good for my country, and I'll support it. But the whole idea is we have multiple crises in this country: affordability crisis, energy crisis, housing crisis, foreign wars. But the number one crisis we face is a crisis of leadership. You have career politicians who are just loyal to a party or an agenda, not to the country. And I think we just need someone who's going to go in and say, you know what, I'm just going to be loyal to America and my state.
Fair enough. So are there role models for you currently or historically for U.S. senators?
I would say my favorite Republican is Teddy Roosevelt. You know, Teddy Roosevelt, in my eyes, came in. He saved capitalism. One could argue, back in the Gilded Age, he took on the oil barons and the railroad tycoons that had a stranglehold on our economy, and small businesses thrived, and competition came, prices lowered. We need something like that. We need an approach. You know, Affordable Care Act was never affordable because it allowed 3 vertically integrated insurance companies to control 90% of our health care. That's not true capitalism to me, right? That is cronyism. That is even corporate socialism, if you will. Mm-hmm. So we need somebody that's going to come in and take an approach, you know, not what the Ed Markeys of the world is. He's going to say Medicare for all, which is never going to happen. He's going to say Green New Deal, which is never going to happen. You need someone to come in and say, hey, let's roll up our sleeves and tackle these problems in a pragmatic way.
Yeah, there's an old expression, you know, if you think healthcare is expensive now, wait until it's free.
Right.
You know, we see.
Well, you're a doctor.
Well, yeah, you know, I got lambasted, this is a long time ago, probably 35, 40 years ago, by artist friends. Somebody owned a gallery, she was wealthy and all that. It's like, you don't want like free healthcare? It's like, how about we do free art? How about we do free gasoline? You know, there's no such thing as free. You know, whatever you make free, basically you're subsidizing one way or another, or you're restricting. So, you know, it tends not to be the thing that you do that you want restricted. Otherwise, you know, otherwise you're basically, in some sense, stealing people's chattel, their actual professional services and so forth. So I do think there are realms in which you can, you know, give, say, discount or quote unquote free situations based on emergencies and whatnot. But leaving that aside, I agree with you. You can't have an economic system. So that is predicated upon, you know, a sector that doesn't have any market forces.
Right.
And we could, I guess, talk about economics a little bit.
Sure.
And I know you've had some investments in Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. And I did at one point. I sold too early, such as life.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It's not too late.
No, I made money on it. I made 10x, but you know,
that's pretty good.
Turns out I could have made, you know, a few more zeros.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's why I'm still here, not you know, on my desert island, my tropical island. Anyway, I think the Bitcoin model is interesting because it's something that comes from nothing. It's kind of a disintermediation of the banking system. You have banking that's done by all kinds of people together locally. And we see this with, you know, the LLMs, the ChatGPT and Grok and all this kind of stuff, where people can do more things on their own. And medicine, whatnot, a lot of our industries, you can, when I say disintermediate, you can take away the person who has to be doing that stuff. So instead of a tax lawyer, instead of having an attorney closing a deal, we can have faster processes. And I again think the major driver of our economy versus many others is the speed with which we can communicate. And the converse is the toll booths, the regulations that people put up, like such as Liz Warren, who's pretty much, that's her whole thing, is to regulate everything.
Right.
I'm wondering what kind of parts of the economy would be, if you're agree with me, which you may not be, mm-hmm. Which parts of the economy you might see that we can make more efficient in such a manner?
Well, I think that blockchain technology, which is Bitcoin and others, are absolutely revolutionary. I would encourage everyone to read the book, The Creature of Jekyll Island, which is by Ed Griffin, and it shows you how the Federal Reserve was created. And if you really get into our banking system, it really is, people would be shocked. You know, a lot of people don't understand fractional, you know, banking, you know, where they just hold a little bit of your 10% of your deposits and loan the rest of your money and make all kinds of risky bets. But stablecoin legislation that passed under President Trump, the Genius Act, that has made cross-border payments and things of that nature, remittances, much more efficient. and we can use it. I got into Bitcoin because you could cut out the intermediary, the bank, and have peer-to-peer payments, limit that friction. Think about it. You can do we've had the internet and email. You can send an email and a picture to someone in seconds, but just a few years ago, it was still faster to get in a plane and take $10,000 in cash from here to London than to wire it, because it would take 5 business days. And so there's lots of things we can do. What we want to do is use blockchain technology and other innovations, AI, to foster individual capitalism around the world. And I think AI and blockchain is the perfect vehicle. One of the biggest things I supported President Trump's decision on was appointing a crypto czar, a blockchain czar, which is David Sachs, an AI czar, to make sure that we win that race on innovation, because whoever wins this AI race is going to lead the world.
Fair enough. You know, I understand all that, but a lot of these things come about because they're independent of government. So, you know, every time there's a czar, I worry whether that's going to, you know, kill the goose that lays the golden egg. And you know, our innovation economy, you know, the internet didn't happen. It happened through some original government laying the groundworks, I guess, you know, through DARPA and whatnot. But, you know, the actual functionality, the commerce part, happened spontaneously.
Yeah.
And
let me just interrupt you, because I agree with you. The czar is more of, though, is to try to make sure that the government gets out of the way.
Right.
That's the key. You and I are completely tracking on that. You know, for example, you have people at the state level that want to overregulate everything. And technology such as AI, that can get in the way. I mean, you know, in 1980 here in Massachusetts, our SEC regulator, Securities Exchange kind of commission at the state level, said, you know what, this risky new computer company, it's too risky. And they even prevented regular people from buying the IPO because they wanted to protect us.
Right.
That was over-regulation, and that company was Apple. And a $1,000 investment would be worth about $2 million today. And that was our government protecting us from making a bad decision by ourselves.
Yeah. So to wit, I had this discussion over the dining room table probably 20 years ago with my now late mother-in-law and late father-in-law, amongst others. And he and I were talking about how they should like dissolve this concept of Social Security, Medicare and whatnot, and let people just buy, because he was a business guy. He had started a bank, and he was a big guy in a small town. And, you know, he was a functional guy. He you know, started a bank with some friends and whatnot. There it's a bank now. It's still there and whatnot. And mother-in-law was more like, oh, no, you know, we don't have the security and so forth. We're not going to trust it. But the returns, when you put your money in, as opposed to like having it in an account of some type, if you took all your Social Security money and put it in an account, you'd have like, I think by, you know, if you do it your whole life, about 6-8 times more than the government's ever going to be sprinkling out.
No, you're right. And I don't mean to interrupt you, but I just wanted you to know that, like, I'm 57 years old. I have a 7-year-old. Should my 7-year-old be on the same Social Security system that her father and her grandfather and her great-grandfather was on? I don't believe so. I don't believe so at all. And so these are the issues that we need to tackle. Sorry to interrupt you.
That's fine. No, that's perfect. No, and we have 5 more minutes left. So, you know, my feeling about Social Security is it's not that social and it's not that secure. I mean, they don't really have, you know, Al Gore's lockbox, you know, ever. It's all part of general funds.
Right.
And so the general funds
that they rob for everything.
And yeah, it's kind of a Ponzi scheme because it all got created without any reserve money. So they're basically all just taking the money from the young people and pouring it into the glass of the old people. And as the old people started living longer, there's, you know, they had to take more. Anyway, so it's a funny system. So I understand you're an attorney. What's kind of the business or I guess sensibilities you bring to the Senate that would be unique, and or whatever closing statements you want to have in the next few minutes?
Well, I appreciate it. You know, well, one is something I'm proud of is, as an attorney, I sued the SEC, Securities Exchange Commission, on behalf of small investors and won an award called Defender of Freedom Award. Also won Consumer Advocate of the Year and Lawyer of the Year by Lawyers Weekly for that. And the reason I'm bringing that up is that I've taken on multi-billion-dollar corporations and insurance companies on behalf of consumers. And career politicians like Elizabeth Warren, like Ed Markey, they claim they're for the consumer, but they're really not. They're really for centralized control of wanting to control like 5 banks, if it's the banking committee, or technologies. They want 5 technology companies that the government can control. And so I have cut a paycheck many times running a small business for the last 25 years, something that Ed Markey has never done. What I want people to know is to reject the toxic division that's being pushed in this country, and to vote for who the best candidate is in a particular race, and reject all of these theories where they convince you there's only 2 sides and one side doesn't love the country and is a threat to democracy. The real enemy are career politicians, okay, who have devalued our dollar to the point that in the last 5 years alone, the US dollar has depreciated 20%. It's depreciated 98% over the last 50 years. And it's because of career politicians like Ed Markey and Republicans on the other side who have been in Congress or the Senate for 50 years, who spend reckless money. They shut down the government, but they get paid. We have TSA agents at Logan Airport right now not getting paid, but the politicians who shut it down do. And so I just want them to understand that I think it's time for a fresh perspective. Someone who has went through cancer, went through poverty, run a small business, and all of those things, who brings that kind of perspective to the Senate.
Fair enough. So a hypothetical question. If it turned out to be Seth Moulton, not your opponent, how would things differ for you, or what would the message be? Is that...
Well, I think Seth Moulton, like I said before, their only argument is that they'll fight Trump. They're always fighting against things. And I'm coming to the table saying, isn't it time that you elected someone who's going to fight for things?
Yeah.
Fight for what's right, not fight and support an agenda. Support you, everyday people. I know your struggles because I've lived through them. I'm not an ideologue. I just want to go solve problems. The real reason I'm running is because I've made a difference in my life and my children's life. And before I leave this planet, I want to be able to say I made a difference in other people's lives.
Well, that's hard to argue with. I think sometimes, if Donald Trump said, I think breathing oxygen is incredibly awesome, half the country would, would hold their breaths and turn blue. And I think they've done a little bit of that, especially I've noticed the hair turning blue, but that's a whole side thing.
Absolutely.
So as far as Newton taxpayers, anything that would help our pocketbooks, 30 seconds.
Well, I want them to go to johndeatonforsenate.com to learn more about me, but I also am fighting for the audit that the government here refuses to comply with. Me and 28 other taxpayers have sued the legislature to force the audit, and we have more teeth actually in our lawsuit than Diana, who I support, Diana DeZoglia. And so I am fighting for the taxpayer even in my personal life.
Well, thank you so much. I met her at an event in December. She actually does great karaoke, by the way.
She's awesome, singer.
So we'll have to test you out at some other point. Thank you so much for joining us. John Deaton for U.S. Senate.
Thank you.